microphones, and so we can minimize background noise. All right, so first, what we want to do is talk about what's been going on. So first of all, not only the pandemic resulted in not only the loss of throughput and income, small practices suffered dearly. We've discussed some of that, obviously, but now we got hit yet again with the cyber attack on Change Healthcare. And for anyone who uses any of the clearinghouses that were affected by this, you all of a sudden saw a complete stoppage of cash flow. There's the old saying in Wall Street, which is some of these companies were too big to fail. And, we sort of have a different premise in private practice section, which is, are we too small to fail? Which is, if physicians no longer have the option to go into private practice, the entire system suffers more, and that's really why we exist. So after these two massive impacts on our economics, what's the third one, and is there a safety net that's possible? So we don't want to spend too much time on we will obviously spend a little bit of time next on the Change cyber attack issue, and because that's what got us to this discussion today. But I want us to sort of keep our eye on the ball, which is we want to talk about solutions for the next one. And this one still is resolving itself. It hasn't solved itself yet, but sort of what happens next time. Is there a way to create an economic safety net for small practices that don't have 3, 4, 5 payroll cycles to wait for the next cash normal infusion? So before we do that, let's do a poll quick and look at, so these polls will help us sort of gauge for all of you that are here what impact this had. So how was your practice impacted by the recent Change Healthcare cyber attack? Scheduling issues, claims, submissions challenges, delayed payments, all three, or not affected at all? All right, so quarter of you said delayed payments, all three, 13%. And I think that's about what we're seeing. If not, it might be a little lower, but I'm hearing anywhere from a third to a half of practices were impacted by this, and that's about what we're seeing here. It's probably a little lower, but bottom line is that this is quite significant, and this is just the sampling of the folks that are here. So let's talk about the impact on you. And I think the red flags are important in that we've had a lot of practices talk about unique aspects of this to them. And we have a few guests that I think can really help us sort of see what they've seen, since they've talked to a lot more practices as we're all trying to struggle in our own practice. We thought it'd be really good to hear from Wendy Thompson and Monica Seglowska about really what you've seen, and maybe introduce yourself and what you've seen in the market here in the Valley. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jasser, and thank you all for letting us join. We are we pretty much exist to support these private practices. That's really what our whole goal is. And so whenever these types of interruptions come about, we try very hard to push as much information out as we can to each of you. Unfortunately, in spite of that, there's always a lot of kind of false information or inaccurate information, and it's hard to really know where to go. So Monica and I have both spent a little bit of time talking about ways to prepare and talk a little bit about what we saw. Monica, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's good.
we'll start by kind of talking about the very real reality of the financial situations of private practices. Most private practices, large or small, are operating on a very narrow profit margin anyway. And so your private practice has this narrow profit margin, and then there's an interruption. Okay. The interruption, you have things in your own world, like, billing transitions, or UHC does a prepayment review. So there's all these, I always say the insurance companies are in no hurry to get you paid, right? And so there's all these interruptions that happen even on a regular basis to each of you. And what we have found going into COVID and with Change Healthcare is that we already have a small profit margin. We're already kind of barely standing, and then something like this can really wipe you out. And so there are some things we talked about that we'd like to share with you and exchange ideas about ways to prepare if that works for each of you. Some people did not realize they were affected because the Change Healthcare, the perception is that Change Healthcare was just the clearinghouse. If you happen to have your billing system with Change Healthcare, then you're affected. But it really took down Access in general, Banner, some of the other several of the Access plans, I think Mercy Care.
Mercy Care.
And so what these payers did is Banner actually, Banner actually cut checks and sent them to the physicians when they couldn't get it processed through the clearinghouse. But Medicaid and several of the other commercial plans just stopped paying altogether. And, there's been all sorts of rumors and speculation that maybe Optum planned this because, you do take this kind of narrow profit margin and throw something like this in. And literally since this, I've seen 3 or 4 private practices close, and it's heart-wrenching. So our goal is to equip you with enough knowledge now or later so that you can navigate through it, other than just the traditional save a reserve so that you can cover payroll. Because the reality is, because the profit margin is so small, you don't always have that luxury. Do you guys have any questions before we offer a few suggestions? Okay.
Hi, Wendy.
Yeah.
I'm Sarah
Hi.
Patel. I think I just wanted to hear a little bit more from some other people, maybe some other private practice owners, kind of what their experience has been over the last couple months. For us, I think, Wendy, it's kind of very similar. Like initially, we didn't know how much of an impact because our clearinghouse, we don't send our claims through Change Healthcare, or we didn't know really how much of our affiliation was, but it definitely has been affected. It's just like kind of sporadic for us. But I think what kind of feels a little bit frustrating, or maybe in isolation, like how I feel kind of isolated, is it just feels like this big thing happened. It affected us, and then we really felt like there was really a lack of support on what to do. I mean, it's so sad to hear that yet another private practice has closed, with an external kind of force, and there's all these hits, like we kind of started, like, how do we keep ourselves head above water and continue to do what we do and that we care about doing? So I don't know. For me, it was just like another thing, like, oh my gosh, like another thing. And I know that's kind of how it is being a business owner, but it was just like, how are we supposed to come across this where our patient data was affected? Really, we're with almost like we didn't even realize how much of an effect or how involved we were. So I just wanted to see if anyone else had anything to share.
Yeah, Sarah. Yeah, I have my own practice. I use eClinicalWorks for my revenue cycle management that uses the TriZetto clearinghouse. So I thought I was in the clear. Be saved, compared to my other friends that use Athena, that use Change Healthcare, that were totally screwed. But I came to realize, over the past few months that, yeah, my collections is low. Like it is really low. And I started to realize that Cigna, which I saw a lot of Cigna patients recently, the EviCore Healthcare uses, this company. Banner, also uses company, and some of the United Healthcare companies also use this. I don't really see many Mercy patients, but yeah, I with some of my major payers using that, I'm now, and now they're telling me to send paper checks. So my biller literally just sent paper checks just last week, rather than month, because we weren't receiving anything. So I'm in the hole a lot. And I got a lot of expenses. Monica and Wendy know about all my expenses. So, but so I mean, yeah, it's really impactful for me because I have to plan now. Like, when am I going to get this increased? When am I going to get this revenue? Hopefully, to be able to manage all my expenses. So I'm sort of in the dark. I mean, I'm able to stay afloat, but I don't really know when I'm going to be able to collect this flash cash flow that I could really use right now, that I was expecting to collect right now. So yeah, I was definitely mistaken about my situation.
And just to put some national emphasis on what was happening, our private practice physician section email listserv and other discussions nationally has been people complaining about being given payday loans, which are high interest rates, and it's just absolutely no way to pay that stuff back. There is absolutely no way. Because by the time you don't make it up in volume by doubling your volume afterwards, you sort of lost those months. So they really are just adding increased debt. Second, the fire sale prices that many people have sold their practices at, especially to Optum and other companies, that which is why some of the conspiracy theories are out there about what happened. I don't think those conspiracy theories are true, but the bottom line is that just like we all pay a lot for disability insurance, we pay for insurance to protect our payrolls and others. If we, have an accident of some kind, there should be a safety net for this type of stuff that we don't pay for, where you just get reimbursed because there's some disaster that happens and you move forward. So I don't know if anybody else had other examples of what they've experienced, or maybe Wendy, if you want to lay out some of the solutions, and then we can maybe work back from the solutions as to how that would have worked for us.
Yeah. I mean, the core issue here, at least in our perspective, is how helpless many of you feel, whether it's your insurance rates or what happens when you don't get paid or the complexity of revenue cycle management. It is a lot. I mean, it is a lot. It is a lot for a normal business owner. It's even more complex for each of you. And I bring that up just for validation. There's the most important thing that each of you can do is, it kind of goes to what Dr. Bhatnagar said when he said, I thought I was going to be in good shape. I didn't really know whether it was COVID or this, or sometimes a billing transition. There are so many ways for you to get your income interrupted. There are so many ways. The number one thing that we're suggesting to each of you is a simple, we have three major solutions, but the first one is simply to know your financials. And when we're done, we can email Share to send to you three different things we think everyone should just know. Okay. And that's what you get for income a month, what you have for expenses, and what your payroll is. Okay. Because when we look at these major interruptions through the years, the number one thing that's kind of set the practices apart is just an understanding of where you're at financially. And some of you are thinking, I know where that is at any given moment. And some of you are thinking, my office manager, my CPA, my consultant, whoever it is, handles that. It's really something you need to know. And I'm just asking you to know three little metrics, because it puts you in touch with your business. It allows you to say, hey, if I've got an interruption of 2 weeks or 2 months, what am I going to do? And so that knowledge of your business is kind of the very first thing. The other components of knowing your business that we discussed are your insurance coverage. So we spent quite a bit of time on the phone with insurance companies, and I'm not talking malpractice. I'm talking about cyber interruption. There's several different types of policies or coverage that you may have, even for 5 or 10,000, 15,000 within your existing insurance plans, that would be covered in this type of interruption. If you know that you don't have it, you might want to reach out and talk about getting it. It might be $1,500 a year that you don't feel like you even want. But because of how helpless so many of you are in these situations, we're finding that we're actually putting claims in and working on things like data interruption, et cetera, especially because of your dependency on so many different mechanisms to send a bill out. Does that make sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. So if you don't know your coverage, get to know it. If you do, or you don't have something, it's worth asking the question for, because this impact is so significant. The other thing we talked about, and this sounds more complex than it is, because so many physicians in private practice, you're seeing your patients, you've got your team of providers that you have your PA or NP, you've got partnership issues, whatever else you have. So many people don't really know where their business is going. And I don't mean long term. I'm not trying to make it a fancy plan. I'm just saying simply, a lot of times, let's just use Dr. Jasser. Dr. Jasser says, Wendy, we are really struggling. This Change Healthcare thing is just killing us. Right before Change Healthcare, UHC had us on a prepayment plan. We had income delayed. I just don't know when we're going to get out of this. You have the responsibility now to find that out, right? And what I say is, a lot of times we hear people, billers, office managers, billing companies say it's going to work out, it's going to work out, you're going to start to see money. I think that you have to just kind of know, unfortunately, no one is going to advocate for your income the way that you're going to advocate for it. And so many of you, because you're financially stretched, are seeing patients till the beginning of the day, to the end of the day, every day of the week. But just having 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours a week where you can say, let me get in touch with my business. I'm not talking about fly in the sky. I mean, I've worked with many of you and many of your colleagues. I'm talking about just very simple things so that you don't feel a sense of helplessness. You know what your cash flow is going to look like. Does that make sense to all of you? Do you feel like you guys generally have an idea of that, or have you struggled with that in the past? And if so, is that because of the information you're given, or what time, what is that?
So clarify, Wendy, if we have good GPS on where we're going and we know we're headed towards a cliff that we're going to get to in 2 weeks, you're saying that's helpful to know that it's 2 weeks versus not knowing any idea whether it's 5 days or 5 months?
I'm saying hold the people accountable that are communicating that with you. Okay.
Oh.
So if it's your biller, your office manager, your CPA, your consultant, and someone saying, oh yeah, your charges went out because they were delayed because you went on vacation, or I got sick, or whatever the excuse is, right? Things within your control. So I get the Change Healthcare, it's kind of a different thing, but it will mitigate the impact of things like Change Healthcare if you have a strong grasp. Otherwise, and so many times you guys have your own interruptions that aren't these pandemics, right? And your biller or someone saying, oh, it'll be done, it'll be done. I really feel okay about saying, when is that going to be done? I need to plan. I need to know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Wendy, I think what you just said is really, really helpful and so powerful. What I implemented at my clinic is we do an end of day report. And so everyone in my office is not huge, so it drives everyone crazy. But I'm like, I know you get a lot of emails, but this really helps me. So we do like an end of day report. It's kind of like, what I equate it to is kind of when we give sign out to like resident to resident, to the day staff, to the night staff. And the same in the morning, we do the same. It's like, okay, not so much like, oh, this is what I worked on. It's just kind of a communication tool to whomever's there the next day. This is where I ended. This is kind of where I'm starting off my next day. And so in each department, we have that end of day report. And then everyone that, including myself, everyone that needs that report has it. So let's say someone's off the next day, they kind of know where that other person ended off. If someone's gone for a week, they know what happened all week previously to that. And it's been really helpful. It was really helpful for me. So I wanted to share that worked for me.
I love that idea. I think that when, it's certainly become a little bit of a generational thing. When there were higher reimbursements, the physicians didn't have to spend as much time on this, right? And we see a lot, if anybody asked me what do you see as the physician's biggest mistakes from a financial standpoint, I really think, and when I say the word trusting, it's not that anybody has ill intention, but I think, maybe handing off that responsibility and accountability to so many other people, because A, it's a little bit easier for them to understand it. And B, you don't have time. But what has happened through the pandemic and this latest interruption is that for the folks that had a grasp on where they were at and what they were doing, we were able to quickly mobilize and apply for short-term loans or the grants that they offered, et cetera, right? We knew exactly, and they knew exactly how long their cash was going to be until it ran out. And so knowing that allows you to go into these situations more empowered.
What could maybe help too for people that have been affected is if they can run a report, maybe find out from your clearinghouse, like which payers are affected. And if you run a report on the appointments that you see in the last 3 months, and you can see, like, you can maybe isolate those payers and then have someone like go through, make sure all these claims have been submitted and they've actually been processed or whatever point that they're at. I don't know if that could help people kind of see where there's some cash flow missing.
It's a great idea. Any of their accounts receivable. But I think what our first point is about knowing your business is you can't enter a crisis if you're already in a crisis. And I tend to be pretty frank and real about private practice struggles. It doesn't matter what the specialty is. It is a small business, right? And we all know how small businesses work, and there's a beauty to it. But if you're already in a crisis, and so our step one suggestion is, let's get your practice out of a financial crisis. That is not going to happen when UHC finally catches up with their payments. It's not going to happen when the biller finally catches up with their charges. You have confidence in kind of your own personal ownership that person, no matter how great they are, no matter how much you trust them, it's a heavy weight for them to carry. And any knowledge you have about your business, whether it's your current or future cash flow, will help you when you enter this situation to figure out how severely we need to react. Any other comments or questions about that? Monica, was there anything about that you wanted to add to?
No, I don't think so, but do you want to move to the kind of second point that I think led?
Yeah.
The relationship. So what obviously is not going to work for, well, I think it is going to work for everybody. And I think it could be tough. Part of it is creating the strong relationships with, could be with any of your support team, which of course is ARMA, your billing company, your CPA, consultants, really continuing to create those strong relationships, because that's going to allow you to get more knowledge regarding what even happened with Change Healthcare. What Wendy and I know you all touched upon, is that when Change Healthcare happened, there was just confusion everywhere. I feel like no one knew what was going on. No one knew who was affected. And I feel keeping the lines of communication open with your support team is vital, because that information was changing day from day, right? Like we said, at first, everybody thought it was whoever had Change Healthcare as a clearinghouse. And then slowly that additional information started bleeding out. But I think the toughest part of it was that the payers, majority of the time, were not even communicating what the issues was. So I think surrounding yourself with the right support team is going to help you to kind of wheedle through the information that's coming through and determine what is going to have the most impact on you. And the secondary part of relationships would be creating relationships with your vendors. So going back to the point of knowing your business, knowing kind of what expenses you have coming up. When you know the expenses, when you're creating relationships with vendors, it allows you to deal with it at least short term. Like, what's going to happen if I can't pay my McKesson bill, or I can't make my rent? We've noticed that a lot of our clients that specifically had solid relationships with the vendors were able to quickly communicate with them and go, hey, X, Y, and Z is happening. What can we do to make through it? Can I make a weekly payment of whatever amount and take that invoice and stretch it out over like 2 months? Or, regarding rent, what can I do? I know I'm going to be late. So I think that had a huge impact with our clients that specifically had those strong relationships in place. And allowed you to create a cash flow too. I think with a lot of our clients that might have been already on the on the edge before Change Healthcare happened, we did sit down with them and go, okay, let's put on paper, what does your cash flow look like for the next month or 2 months, right? We knew there's going to be a slowdown with income coming through. You already were kind of close to the edge. Let's look at your expenses on a weekly basis. And I think the second you start putting things on paper, it allows you to feel more in control as well. So I think that's important. That goes back to knowing your business. You go, hey, I have payroll in 2 weeks. It's this amount. I know I have to make that payroll. I can't get around it, but maybe I can stretch that rent payment or you know, my McKesson bill. So I think that's been vital in planning after a disaster like this happens.
Do you guys,
We
quick
learned that,
question,
yeah. Mhm.
quick question, do you, and the sample size obviously is very small, but some of the feedback I've heard nationally is that the people that outsourced their billing had a much bigger problem than people that insourced and had their own staff because of the communication issues. Now, is that an unfair comparison or?
I don't know. We'll have to look at that. I will say that we felt more helpless with outsourced.
Yeah,
And we normally like outsourced providers because normally we're saying, hey, the nice advantage of outsource is that you've got some redundancy if there's an interruption. We definitely felt more helpless with outsourced billing. We felt very subject to their updates, which may or may not come frequently. It very like, are you going to send the claims out in paper? What are you doing? It was easier to control the situation with in-house billing. I would argue you don't have the same redundancies and maybe not the same knowledge, but if you ask for a sense of comfort about it, probably the in-house billing, because you knew they were going to be able to get creative about what to do, you know.
exactly. That's 100% what we heard. Yeah.
It was really very frustrating. And, you know, we did, to Monica's point about the vendors, we did kind of immediately tell everybody, just don't pay anything you don't have to pay to keep the business running, because we don't know how long this is going to be. And I don't know about all of you as a secondary comment, but the lack of coverage about this from a catastrophe standpoint, I don't know what we can collectively do as professionals to avoid this in the future, but I felt like you all were very alone trying to navigate this very complex process, and none of us knew what to do. None of us knew what to do.
That's actually our last 20 minutes will be on that. I've got a solutions slide, but I don't want to steal from your
Awesome.
thunder. Oh, yeah,
Okay. No, that's great.
one more point.
No, steal my thunder. Okay.
Yeah.
Last point. This is very critical for all of you. The financials, clean up the financials. Financials are not the billing statements. Financials are what banks ask for. They're what purchasers ask for. This is very small. This is something your CPA does, your office manager does, your bookkeeper, whoever it is. What happens in these situations is that we're either submitting for grants, or you're submitting for grants, you're looking at loans. You might say, this is the last straw, I'm getting rid of my practice. And if your financials aren't in order, and what I mean by that is maybe your mom loaned you 25 grand 15 years ago and you paid her back, but it still looks like you owe it to her on your financials. Maybe you're putting personal expenses through there that look like business expenses. We want to be able to quickly isolate those financials. So in these situations, if you need extra funds, whether it's a line of credit or a bank or whatever, you're not providing them stuff that is old, outdated, and not accurate. And in the follow-up note to share, we'll include what that looks like. It's not tough. It's just basically saying, don't neglect them, because in situations where you need to react quickly to get funds, that's the first thing they're going to ask for. And I think those were kind of our bottom, our kind of high level. But if you notice, all of it comes down to having ownership, control, and knowledge of your financials within your practice. And I know it's a heavy ask, but I think it'll allow everybody to feel much more in control when these situations happen in the future. I didn't put on here, get a line of credit ready, because most of you already have one, or many of you have one and have already used it. You know, we're not saying some of the very obvious things, build up a reserve. Those are all the ideal situations, but these are the very minimal core things that will help position you so that you can navigate through it quickly, relying on your resources, your your financials, your team, and your suppliers to help you through it.
Thank you, Wendy. And we'll look back at some of these as we talk about sort of bigger picture solutions now. Can we actually share, can we do the poll first and see how many people are in a ACO and then, or does it have to be in the order of the slides? Okay. You're muted.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me go to the polls. One moment.
So this is relevant because many of us are in ACOs, some are not. We wanted to get a sense of who's in an ACO because some of the solutions, as you mentioned Banner before, they did give out checks and
Actually, Susan, do you want to try to launch it? It's not letting me launch the poll on my end.
there we go. All right, so first question, do you participate in an ACO, yes or no? And if you are in an ACO, has they discussed, for example, the Banner ACO has a care integrative network that we did talk about this. So maybe some of you talked about safety nets or economic solutions for this event. If you could answer these two. So a third of you are in ACOs, and of those that are, the vast 4/5 did not discuss it. So if you could get the next slide about solutions. So what I want us to do is, you know, we sort of brainstormed as a GC last time some solutions out there. I added a few that have been discussed nationally, and you know, I thought we'd open it up. And one of the reasons to discussing this here is to maybe look at maybe resolutions or something ARMA can do either statewide or the AMA can do nationally as they look at some of these more evergreen solutions for the next disaster that's around the corner. So obviously the bank loans part, you know, that's probably the least palatable. Subsidies, you know, if you look at other industries, and that's something that, you know, is a common thing to do, is look at what other industries have done, you know, whether it's farm industry that deals with weather changes, they get government subsidies. And as loath as many of us in free market private practice are to do that, the bottom line is that the government is subsidizing. For example, during the pandemic, the insurance industry was paying out 60-70% less in utilization because of the restriction of care as a result of, you know, treating just the virus. And so as a result, they were banking money while we were operating at 60-70% threshold, increased a little bit by televisits, but still not at 100%, and we didn't have those margins. So it was a bit of a crime as far as I'm concerned, and most of us, to see insurance companies banking money because utilization rates on elective procedures were all down for a couple of years while we were suffering on the vine with very little to make up for even after 2 years. So one is subsidies from our ACOs, and remember, it's population medicine. So how can we word this or legislate it in a way that makes us partners with them? I put stark relief at the bottom there because some of this, the reason Optum, for example, is buying pharmacies, buying practices, buying physicians, is they lose all the Stark problems by self-referral issues when they end up owning all of those things under one umbrella. So in order for some of this equity stuff, because other industries, what happens during crises is they can pay out stock, they can pay out other things during a crisis when they don't have cash to give you some equity that you can then have as part of that business owner. We are now folks that are helping these large ACOs achieve better data. We're putting resources into helping them. They then get paid more, and yet we really have no equity on that other than the gracious check we get in incentive payments 6, 12, 18 months later after the incentive. So there might be some ways to build into the system subsidization of an insurance policy through the ACOs to protect the community docs, if you will. Government subsidies is another way through, just like FEMA works to subsidize, you know, folks that aren't insured, or, you know, or that might be insured, or whatever it is, government might, there might be a quick way to provide subsidy. We saw that with PPP during the pandemic, but that was for all businesses, not just healthcare. In some ways, the businesses that shut down at least lost their payroll. We didn't shut down, many of us, and we still had payroll and many other expenses. So it's a little different in that there was no specific, there was a pandemic relief for some of us that was different because of the Senate bill that did allow some additional, but there was a lot of documentation involved with that, and I'm sure some of you did that. And again, with the Change Healthcare disaster, I don't think there's any relief looked at. So that's part of it. Tax credits is another way. And then some of us, Ronnie and others have talked about the Physicians Foundation. If you've not looked at their website, it's fantastic. It was a foundation put together after the Aetna HMO lawsuit. That was a class action lawsuit where they settled because they were intentionally denying most prior authorizations for some time. And then there was a class action settlement in which the AMA and others then took tens of millions of dollars and put it into this foundation to help research and look at ways to protect private practices and drive students and residents into private practice. So look at their site. They do a lot of good research, and it might be good for us to connect with them, which I think the PPP is doing in the AMA level on this issue also. So that was a little smattering of what we've been thinking about big picture wise. And if something jumps out at you, let me know, or, if there's ways to effectuate some of this, it would be great.
I think one of the things we talked about as a governing council was that there was potential for something similar to the Aetna issue with a class action. Do you know at the big AMA level if there is something like that in a reactive stance? I know we're trying to look proactively here, but for the time and for the people that are suffering now, is there something down the pipe?
Some of the practices right now that have been damaged by what happened are looking at suits that sold for fire sale prices, but they're collateral damage now, and but that is being looked at.
I know this is from a very practical standpoint, but we had a client suggested one of the news channels reach out to us during this change crisis about how Medicaid was supposed to be advancing payments to people, but they weren't doing it, and they were taking forever to do it. One thing I really wondered is how the community can become more educated about the general crisis. Is it something, and again, this is certainly more general, but is it something like, partnering from a public standpoint with a news station or newscaster or something to put some additional pressure on legislature or any of these other areas? This access thing, this Medicaid thing, the day after the story, we started receiving those advanced funds that we had been waiting on for 3 weeks. It seems like it works. So I'm just wondering if that's something that could help for the future in preparing for it, I suppose.
I'm a solo cardiologist, and I've been in practice for almost 44 years. And I have one person who does my billing for 44 years, one person who handles the accounts. We do not accept cash. We don't take credit cards, and we're probably 80% Medicare. So we did not receive a payment. Our clearinghouse was Change Healthcare. They were of no help to my person who's been with me for 44 years. I'm in contact with her every day. I know where every penny is in our accounts. I know what we bill because I'm the only person. I know what's in the account. I had a savings account set up that we had to tap into in order to pay payroll and rent. Medicare was of no help. My biller went to paper billing because we weren't getting anywhere.
Yeah.
Change Healthcare basically was dishonest disingenuous. Medicare would put her on hold for an hour at a time, and then eventually told her everything's available online. Blue Cross Blue Shield still hasn't processed our billing, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona. And our first payment, due to Lisa doing paper billing, we had a check for about $8,000 on April the 10th. And that was the first check we had since February the 21st. And it has been absolutely disgusting, the going back and forth with the lack of service from Medicare, from the bureaucracy, the lack of service now from Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we switched clearinghouses, and that required money and labor because my person had to work extra hours. And we switched, it's been an absolute disaster. And I don't know, Zuhdi, how much the AMA or ARMA really supports private practice. Seems like the AMA has been in bed with big business, which has been in bed with Obamacare. And it's been only about 23%, maybe 27% of physicians now are in private practice. The rest work for big organizations or hospital systems, and the vertical integration continues. And that's what happens with United Healthcare, that is almost becoming a monopoly. And it's going to be the destruction of the quality of medicine and private practice. And I feel, you know, I'm obviously 73 years of age, and I'd love to practice till I'm in my 80s. But the way things are going right now, I don't know what the future holds. And I was a member of the AMA for many years and quit many years ago when I figured the AMA only represented 17% of us and wasn't doing anything to help us.
Well, Fred, thank you. It's so great to see you here. And
Nice to meet you.
I know we've talked on the phone many times, but it's good to see you. Yeah, I think there's a boomerang effect that's happening as initially, you know, the AMA and hospitals and insurances, many of us felt we were sort of left on the you know, on the vine back during Obamacare, and now it's boomeranging back to where the AMA fast-tracked our section to get formed during the, you know, right after the pandemic, and I think similarly, you know, nationally we're seeing that a lot of the organized medicine, if you will, is looking at what the hospitals are doing, what insurance companies have done, and realizing that they're basically looking out for themselves versus really the institution of profession of medicine. So I think some of that's coming back. You know, the rumors of our demise is a bit overstated, in that, yes, residents are going much less into private practice, but at the end of the day, if you look at burnout rates, even though we work more hours and get paid much less per hour, you know, the old saying, which I've said to this group before, is, you know, you'd rather sit in your own, you know what, rather than take it downhill from who you work for. So, you know, at the end of the day, this is coming back, and I think we might end up seeing, you know, free market folks in favor of unionization and other things that we just never would have thought of. But the preservation of the choice of private practice, the AMA is really invested in trying to protect that choice. And so is our state medical society, which is, you know, also has been very much in favor of fast tracking this section to make sure that we still have that choice. So that's why we need your voice, you know, don't give up on us, and, you know, that it's much more effective. A lot of the organizations that tried to form outside the AMA all failed, you know, whether it was Doctors for Patient Rights and a lot of the other organizations, because there were too many small organizations. And I still think the House of Medicine needs our voice of private practice within it. And these types of crises can help create solutions that ensure that there will be an institution of private practice for our kids that, you know, hopefully will decide to go into medicine. Wendy, did you want to add anything about the solution side, that from a bigger, what you see in the market nationally happening?
I think, you know, I'm not in touch with we don't tend to align with some of the lobbyist groups, but I do know that there does seem to be a little bit more education trying to be pushed up to DC about some of the challenges that you're facing, and kind of the bullish behavior of some of the commercial payers. We've yet to see real action on that. You know, we've seen things like the credentialing rules and the contracting rules that were put in place that were actually huge for Arizona, you know, how long it takes to get a provider credentialed, et cetera. But we haven't really seen great traction on that yet. I know that there are some insurance companies that work with medical practices that are looking at their packages that they're offering for the future. I'm not saying that solves the problem. I'm just saying we're seeing that. But I think everything we can do to continue to put pressure on the professional organizations in our legislature, and listen, I truly believe that it's because of the complexity of what you guys deal with on a regular basis. It is so overwhelming for people that are not involved to understand that you actually treat a patient and have services that you might even call and get an authorization for, and they may still say, we're not going to pay you for it. It's just foreign. And so, you know, maybe having a focus on what we can do to provide some education so people can speak confidently about these changes would help.
Wendy, may I interrupt? I just
Yeah.
don't understand how we ever even got there. You know, like how did we like find that appropriate to do? And that's where I just, you know, it's tough, you know, like he's had 50 years of practice behind him, but you put people like me that are like 10 years out of my training, and it's like, what happened here, and like how did we get here, but how do we get out of that, you know? That's the hard part. And then also I'm just wondering, and maybe this is something we just need to think of, what is a market or something that we could emulate that has had maybe similar path to us, where you just, you know, we became like smaller of a group, but still powerful, and just trying to realign that power, getting back to the government and saying, hey, you know, these are the changes we need, otherwise we're gone. Like that's really and the replacement is just, it's not going to be a good form of health. So I just was wondering, what kind of market could we emulate? Or I don't know what term you use, like computer science or engineering or something. I don't know exactly what term, but that we could maybe learn from and maybe use what they've done to help us.
I mean, I think
really
part
like
of it,
where you're going.
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Jessner.
Yeah, I was just going to say part of it, Sarah, I think is a hybrid, meaning that right now, for example, the DPC period, direct primary care groups are doing high fives, like, yeah, we don't do the, you know, we have membership and concierge type, so we didn't have to suffer through this.
Yeah.
You know, and many of us are like, well, hold on a second. You know, we can't abandon our patients that are all insurance based, but there could be a hybrid model where you have a low grade amount of annual fee that some patients, you know, pay, and that would have to be relieved through contractual obligations that the insurance companies have us under, where we have fixed prices. And, you know, the inflationary economy is something else we haven't talked about, right? You have an inflationary economy where all our expenses and payrolls are going up, and our prices are, we're lucky if they don't do a 2% reduction versus a 1% increase, which is not sustainable just by simple economics 101. So
Right.
they're going to have to fix some of that. And I think the time is ripe for us, you know, to get representation to where we can start to create a model where we have basal membership fees that patients have, and they pay us rather than the insurance companies, a lot of that. And, you know, we create an economic model that's a hybrid with insurance, and, you know, and DPC type payments. I don't know.
We have a couple of questions, I think,
Yeah.
Juliana.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll try to keep this quick. It's more of a thoughtful question than one that I really expect an answer to. But when you enter into insurance contracts, there's nothing that says, well, you're going to sign a contract with this little carrier, and then it's going to be swallowed up by, and swallowed up and swallowed up. And oh, by the way, you have no control anymore over where your money is going through, where it's coming from, whether we have to do what we said we were going to do or anything. And how do you fight against that? It's the elephant in the room. And, like, I think Dr. Jasper, you mentioned that the carriers are really just like super carriers, or I don't recall exactly what you said, but that's the problem, is that nobody has been able to stop them, even though monopoly is looking pretty close, and you don't get a choice of your clearinghouse. And because now United Healthcare owns the company that does the prior authorizations, processes the eligibility, and runs your money through for the payments and all of that, it's all intertwined. So you said too big to fail, but it's not, because that process clearly failed. They didn't have a redundancy in place to back that up or something. So I think that it's important looking forward to try to understand as much as we can about the contracts. And I don't know if there's anything we can do about it at this point, because they're so big and, well, we're not. But it would be great to have a task force or something to think about that. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think an economics task force would be perfect with folks just like that's on this Zoom call.
But
Ronnie?
I think also,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, Sarah, but I think, Juliana, even though we're small, like small companies, or, like one individual, not one, but like we can start somewhere. And I guess, it may not change something now, but it could change something for the future.
And
I
I
just think,
100% agree with that.
right? Like, so I guess that our focus should be, it's not now, maybe it's the future.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt.
And a Georgia study showed that 40% of the GDP of healthcare in Georgia was small business medicine, and not as much as you'd think, the large business. And that was 9 years ago. It's probably shrunk a lot since then, but still, we're not as small as, our collective is not as small as you think it is. Ronnie, you have your hand up.
I do, thank you. One of the things I worry about is that small practices, small businesses are always reactive, not proactive. So part of this is to figure out what we're going to do about what we don't know what's around the corner. And I think there's a couple big players we're missing to ask for help. And one is the Physicians Foundation. And I'm not on their board or anything. I've just been exposed to them for a good 20 years. I knew their first CEO from Texas, and they've done marvelous things. They like to, and they have a lot of money. I think they provided over $50 million in grants so far, and they like to empower physicians. They do have a fairly focused way of giving their grants, whether it's leadership or well-being or perspective. But one of the things that they love doing is research. So if we could somehow come up with some questions that we want answered, like what's the most important thing to those of us in private practice? I mean, everybody's going to check to continue to be in private practice, but there might be other things. The educational leadership part may be able to be made more accessible to us. I think at least an approach to them and to the AMA, which was late to the party for sure, but is now happily dancing on the dance floor with us, may be, a little piece of the puzzle. This problem has so many pieces. We can't possibly, as a group or as a state, come up with the solutions. We need help, so why not go get it? Thanks.
And one of the solutions that is on the verge of actually finally breaking through is the site service differential. As all of you know, hospitals get paid 5 to 10 times more than we do for doing the same treadmill and other types of procedures that we do in our office. And it makes no sense. And part of the transparency that needs to happen is, okay, if they want subsidies for free care that they give, then fine, give them subsidies for free care, but don't do it on the back of jacking up prices for things that we do the same for across the street. And now that's actually starting to get to a threshold where the hospital lobby and insurance lobby, especially the hospital lobby, is on the verge of losing that. So any other last comments about possible solutions in the future that you guys want to see that our section do, or maybe some avenues out there of low-hanging fruit where a task force could be convened? Because I think this task force is not only just physicians, but obviously it needs folks like Wendy's expertise and economists, chambers of commerce, I think should be involved. I don't know if you all saw that the recent FTC ruling that ended restricted covenants that came out a few days ago. That's being sued. That's already going to be in court. And actually, our PPDS was split on this nationally. But I will say that it just to end all restricted covenants actually hurts small business in my mind more than it does large business. But it's some of the same issues.
We have exposure to a lot of data. We've done a lot of work, a lot of data. We've asked our clients for anonymous utilization of their data to demonstrate points. I think anything we can collectively do to maximize that, anything across the country, specialties, Arizona. To me, that data access is king. Figuring out what to do with it for the cause of independence is really the next step that I think takes is that task force and is that group of individuals brainstorming about a solution.
And if you hear any new insurance models out there, I know when I got my disability and other there's a personal disability policy, and then your business has a disability policy of some kind that actually has another name that's escaping me right now. But that policy kicks in actually before your medical disability kicks in. It kicks in within 30 days. So I think those are some quick fixes that some folks can have.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. Thank you, Cher, for setting this up, and all the ARMA staff and our GC. Thank you, all of you, for being here. And this recording will be available for people to, hopefully we can send this out to include for folks that missed it as far as some of the work that we do. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll gather some information from Wendy as well. Thank you, Micah and Wendy and Monica, for joining us this evening too.
Thanks for letting us hang out with you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.